Today is Tuesday, August 9th, and I'm speaking, yes, on the record, with Ms. Edna Ellis. Ms. Ellis, what was your maiden name?
My name was Edna Ward.
And your husband's name was William Ellis?
William Ellis, William S. Ellis.
And would you share with me a little bit of your experiences during the World War II era?
Well, Bill and I were married during World War II. We were married November the 14th, 1943, and shortly after that he reported aboard the USS Franklin, CV-13, a large aircraft carrier that had just been commissioned, and they left to go out into the Pacific to fight the war. During that time, I went back to my home in Boone, North Carolina, where I grew up, where I was raised. And a year later, my first son, William Stevens Ellis Jr., Stevie, was born November 3rd, 1944. And all this time, Bill was out in the Pacific fighting, should I say the Japanese?
Sure.
Fighting the Japanese. Will that be recorded?
Sure, it's all right.
Fighting the war. Well, everybody knows what we were doing. I sent a cablegram, and he did not receive the cablegram for, say, like 20 days because they were darkened ship. They weren't allowed to send or receive messages. And on March the 19th, 1945, the ship was bombed by enemy planes. They were about 50 miles off the coast of Japan, and they were going in for many of the ships. The big ships were going in to I forgot, I don't know what expression to use, to try to bring the war to an end, I guess. And the ship was bombed by a Japanese kamikaze, I think it was. And it was early in the morning on March the 19th, and the plane on deck, they were already loaded to go out to drop their bombs. Well, when this Japanese plane dropped his bombs on the ship, the bombs on the planes exploded. And it was a horrible, horrible time. There was a movie made of that several years later, which Gene Kelly narrated, and it tells about all the devastation and the horror. Some 800 men, 800 to 900 men were killed, and 300 were injured or missing. During this time, my husband, he was an electrical engineer officer, and he went, in order to help, a lot of men were trapped. Of course, a lot of people were killed. It was a horrible time. And Bill got a rescue breather from a ship that came alongside, and he went down 5 dark decks. I mean, it was pitch black. And he lit off the diesel generator, which started the ventilation system to clear out the smoke and to help save. Then he helped save several men who were trapped down below, and where they didn't have any air. There were 704 men who survived this, and at the ship, the captain was a very stern taskmaker, and he kept them working night and day. And as he said in this movie that was made, there were several movies made. He said that he kept them so busy they didn't have time to crack up. He said he didn't have a single case of nerves by the time they got back to Brooklyn Navy Yard. So they cleaned the ship up, and they went back under their own power, back through Pearl Harbor, where they were greeted and with lots of people. The band leader on the ship was Saxy Dow, and as they pulled into Pearl Harbor, they were singing "The Old Gray Mare, She Ain't What She Used to Be." And then they went on under their own power back to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And many of the men received, my husband received the Navy Cross for what he did. But he always said he didn't do any more than some of the other people did. But of course, this family was always proud of that. The ship, there's been many books written, and I have. Do you want me to show these?
Sure.
A couple of books which Bill donated to the library back 2 or 3 years ago before he died. We donated them to the old library downtown. This is the USS Franklin, the ship that wouldn't die, and then this is a book that was written shortly after the battle out in the Pacific. And there's a picture in here of a young lady, Julie White, who received these books at the old library. I think she's still here with the library today. Shortly after that, Bill was detached from the Franklin, and he came home to Boone, North Carolina, where I was with my young son. And then after that, we traveled to many places. We lived in California, Guam, Great Lakes, Norfolk, Virginia, New Mexico, Florida. Bill was in the Navy for 24 years.
What brought you to Athens?
Well, he retired from the Navy in 1957, and we came to Athens. His parents lived out in Oglethorpe County near Maxis, Georgia, and his mother wrote about this Westinghouse plant that was being built in Athens. So in due course, he came back here and got a job with Westinghouse, where he worked for 18 years. And this became our home. In fact, we lived here longer than any place else during his Navy career.
Had you visited Maxis before? Did he grow up in Maxis?
He grew up in Maxis, yes. And the reason he went in the Navy, he wanted to go to Georgia Tech, and his parents didn't have any money to send him, so he sold magazines for a while after he got out of high school. In fact, he graduated from the old Athens High School here in Athens. And he sold magazines a while, and then he went up to Chicago, Illinois, and went to Cone Electrical School. And I guess that got him interested in a naval career. So he joined the Navy in, where have I got it here? He joined the Navy in, oh gosh, you want to stop it a minute? I've lost my place.
You're fine.
Okay. Well, he was in the Navy for 24 years. He went to school in Maxis, and then he went to high school here in Athens, as I said. He enlisted in the Navy December 11th, 1933 at Macon, Georgia. And he retired January 31st, 1957 with the rank of captain. He was aboard many ships, the USS Vulcan, the Prairie. Oh, first of all, he spent 7 years on the USS Nevada, a big aircraft carrier. And he had left the carrier, had been transferred from the carrier shortly before Pearl Harbor. And the Nevada was one of the ships that survived when all the ships were sunk. They managed to get the Nevada out of the harbor and beached it. So it survived that. Then he was on the Vulcan, the Prairie, the Winooski, the Mobile, the USS Franklin, and then later, before he retired, he was on another aircraft carrier, the USS Lake Champlain. And he received a number of awards and medals, citations. And I guess the thing his family was most proud of was the Navy Cross. Shortly after Bill died, on June the 6th, 1991, which was a real heartbreaking thing for his family, he suffered a stroke and lived a couple of years after that, but then he had a heart attack and died. And last November, the veterans down in Oglethorpe County Lexington, which is a county of Oglethorpe County, decided to have a time capsule, and they asked all the people to submit something to put in the time capsule. So I wrote or got together some information on Bill and put it in the time capsule, because he was born and reared in Oglethorpe County, and his father owned quite a bit of land, which he loved to visit and hunt and go with his father and walk around over the land in the mountains. I mean, in the woodlands. His great-grandfather, Matthew F. Jackson, was in the Civil War, and he enlisted in Maxis in 1861, and his grave is on the hillside on Bill's land. And it still exists there, and I guess that's enough about that. Anyway, the time capsule is to be opened 100 years from the date it was buried, November the 11th, 1993. We have, you may tell about my children, my family?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, we were married in in wartime, and Bill came back. He was on another ship. At the time he came back, he had received orders to go aboard the Franklin. And we were married November 3rd, we were married November 14th, 1943. And then our son was born a year later. Then later on, our other son, Jim, was born May the 22nd at Great Lakes, where Bill was going to a school at Great Lakes Naval Training Station. We have 3 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Well, I mentioned that James was born in Great Lakes, and then our oldest son, daughter Mandy Ellis Mitchell, was born in 1966. Do you want their dates or anything? Or
That's okay.
Okay. And our other granddaughter was born in 1970, and then our grandson, 1982, and our 2 great-grandchildren were born later.
Wow.
We came to Athens after Bill retired from the Navy in 1957, and then Bill worked with Westinghouse. I mentioned that, didn't I, for 18 years.
Mm-hmm. When did he retire from Westinghouse then?
He retired from Westinghouse 75. And then after that, he worked in real estate for 10 or 12 years just to have something to do. He was a very active person and liked to play golf and hunt, and was interested in our church. And
what church?
we go to Young Harris Memorial United Methodist Church on Prince Avenue, which is one of the older and a very beautiful church on Prince Avenue. And we were active in that, and I still am.
And where have you been living all this time, since 1957?
Oh, you mean here in Athens?
Uh-huh.
Oh, we've been living in Beechwood.
Uh-huh.
In fact, when we came to Athens, we looked around for a place to live, and this called Beechwood, which is near the library. And it was way out in the country. There was no streets. In fact, there were 2 or 3 big farms, and Mr. Say divided up into a subdivision, and eventually bought a lot and built a house on Bishop Drive. It was really not a street. It was just a dirt road, you might say, and it was way out in the country at that time. And then after that, the Beechwood Shopping Center was built a few years later, and Beechwood has become a subdivision in town now. We thought we'd be out in the country for years, but it's a very nice section, and we've enjoyed living there.
Can you tell me a little bit about your own life, about where you were born and brought up? And
Well, I grew up in Boone, North Carolina, which is up in the western part of North Carolina, about 100 miles northwest of Asheville. It's a very beautiful little mountain town. There is a college there. It used to be Appalachian State Teachers College. It's now Appalachian State University. And I think they have an enrollment of 12 to 15,000, maybe more. It's a very beautiful campus. And Boone was just a little tiny place as I was growing up. I went to high school there. I went to grade school out in the country at a little place in the community where I grew up was Oak Grove. And then I went to high school in Boone. It was Boone High School, later changed to Appalachian High. And I graduated in 1939. And we had our 50th high school reunion
August 9th. And I'm still speaking with Ms. Edna Ellis. And right now we've been speaking about her 50th reunion in Boone, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And was that a high school reunion?
Yeah, high school. Then a couple of years later we had our 52nd, which I didn't go to. In May of this year we had our 55th high school reunion, and not as many people came because people are getting older and they had health problems and had grandchildren and all sorts of other things taking place, but we did have a nice time and enjoyed it very much. Oh, I might mention too that my father was in World War I, and I was in Boone recently, and I went down to the Veteran Service Office and looked up some of his records, and the Veteran Service Officer gave me the original copy of his honorable discharge from World War I. And my two brothers, who were twins, were in World War II. So my husband and my brothers and my father were all involved in the various wars. Sons did not go in because they were not the right age, and my oldest son was married at the time, that he would have been drafted or volunteered, and my other son was in school.
Do you recall anything your father would tell you about serving in the Army, or which branch of the service?
He was in the Army, and he was in the 30th Division, which was called the Old Hickory Division, 120th Infantry, and I have a little book I wish I'd brought with me that where it tells, and then he had some records where he told how he sailed to France, and they, and then I found an old letter that he wrote to his father, my grandfather, where he tells about horrible, how they sleep in the dugouts in the trenches, cold weather, and then finally they were able to sleep in a barn, which was like sleeping in a hotel. And they, of course, had a very bad time, but he did survive, and he was in the 4 years of the war. Back in, oh dear, I didn't bring those dates, 1919, and a year later, he and my mother were married. And then I came along a year after that.
Are your brothers still alive?
One of my brothers died this last several months ago. The other one still lives in Boone. He's retired from Blue Ridge Electric membership, and he's very active in his community. And
did they talk to you much about service, about their time overseas?
No, well, some. John was on a B-24 bomber. He was a nose gunner. And of course they had some harrowing times, and my other brother was in the China, Burma, India section, and he was burned in some kind of an accident. But they came back, and came back to Boone and lived there.
Did you write during those years? Did you write letters?
Oh, yes. In fact, I still have a whole box of letters that I wrote to my husband and to my brothers.
Did they come back censored at all?
Yes, they did. They were censored. In fact, when I sent a cablegram to Bill when our son Steve was born, as I said, he didn't receive it for 20 days or so because of the censorship and the secrecy. all the letters I wrote Bill were destroyed on the ship when it was bombed and everything was burned. But I still have the letters he wrote me.
Were there people you were spending your time with back home during those years? Friends or?
Oh yeah, I stayed with my father in Boone. In fact, I remember I was there when President Franklin Roosevelt died. And I was there when Ernie Powell was killed. And I cried because every day I read his poems. And it was a very sad time when President Roosevelt died. And I know we didn't have a television then, but on the radio they had that. They were telling every move the train made as it went back to Hyde Park, wasn't it? When they took his body back from, he was down at Warm Springs, Georgia at the time of his death, which is all history. But I stayed with my father, and then I came down here to Georgia and stayed with Bill's parents out in the country, out from Maxis, out, not near Lexington, and just visited back and forth with the family, relatives. And then when Bill was detached from the Franklin, he came to Boone. My father met him in Johnson City, Tennessee. It was a real horrible, snowy, cold night. And he came back. Of course, first thing he wanted to see was his little baby son that he had not seen. And then after went to visit the relatives, and then he had received orders to California. He went out to the a Navy yard out there, and we stayed there 2 or 3 years, and Kaiser Shipyard, that's where he went. It was one of the places he went to there. And then we received orders to Guam, and he went over and was in Guam for several months before they were able to get quarters for the families to go. And I went over on a ship, transport ship, with all these other mothers and young children who were going to be with their husbands out in Guam. We lived there about a year and a half, and came back for, oh dear, where did we go after that? Well, we went to Tennessee and Florida and different places, New Mexico, and then finally when he retired, we came here to Athens to live.
Can you recall for me how the two of you met?
Oh yeah. You know, during the war, everybody went off to do some kind of defense work. And I was at home in Boone, North Carolina, and my brothers had gone in the Army, and my father was working away doing what they called defense work then. And I had some relatives in Norfolk, Virginia, and I wrote them about coming up there to get a job, which eventually I did, and I worked in the dispersing office in the Navy Yard, which was in Portsmouth, Virginia. But I lived with my cousins in Norfolk, Virginia. We used to ride a bus and get on the ferry and go over to the Navy Yard, to the dispersing office where I worked. And the dispersing office is where people came in to get their pay. And through a friend of mine, I met Bill. He introduced me to Bill at an officers' club one night. And from then on, we, he wasn't around very much because of the ship he was on had to go back to sea. And we corresponded for quite a while. And actually, I didn't know him very well, but then he asked me to marry him, and he came back. At that time, he had received orders to go aboard the USS Franklin. So I got on the train, the Cotton State Special, left Norfolk, and my cousins and my friends gave up my job and came down to Georgia, and we were married here, out in the country at the Methodist parsonage. And of course, at that time, Bill had his car. His car was out at his parents' house. It was an old Plymouth coupe. I've forgotten what year it was. It must have been of that vintage. And we didn't have enough gas coupons to go anywhere. you know, everything was rationed, and we didn't have enough coupons to drive the car up to North Carolina. So we rode the Greyhound bus up to Boone, North Carolina, and visited my father and my relatives. And then we got on the bus and went to Norfolk and Newport News. And that's when he reported aboard the ship, the Franklin. And then after it was commissioned and finished, it went out in the Pacific. And two of the wives that I became very friendly with, well, I went back to North Carolina with I went back and stayed with my father during this time, but we have remained friends over the years, and both of their husbands have since died too, but we still keep in touch.
May I ask you something? I know about Maxis, but I've never heard from the horse's mouth about the story of scholarships for people who raise children in Maxis. Can you shed some light on that story for me?
Well, I don't know a great deal about it, but I do know a Mr. Brightwell, who was a native of Maxis, had left quite a bit of money for this scholarship at Maxis. I think you have to live within a 2-mile radius of the town of Maxis in order to qualify for it. And quite a number of people have received a college education from this scholarship he left. In fact, a lot of his relatives, the Brightwell family, and lots of other people. And it's still there. Some people moved out to Maxis and bought property and became citizens of Maxis in order to receive this scholarship, and became very fond of Maxis and became good citizens and still live there. It's a real nice little town. In fact, many years ago it was a very prosperous town, but I guess after the end of the cotton era, the little town, it didn't fold up, but it wasn't as prosperous as it was. Because I remember my husband saying that one time there were 2 or 3 banks, a number of stores, doctors, a very thriving little town. It's still a nice town, and lots of nice people live in Maxis.
What sort of work did your husband do for Westinghouse?
He was the, oh my Lord, engineer, maintenance. He worked in maintenance. He was the maintenance supervisor. And they, of course, Westinghouse built pole-type transformers. And he was, when he first went there, he was works engineer, and then he became the supervisor of the maintenance department.
Learn a lot being in the Navy?
Yes, they did. In fact, I would say that's the reason he got the job with Westinghouse, was because of his Navy experience. He went to receive a lot of his education in the Navy. He didn't go to college, but I guess he received the equivalent of a college education in the Navy. He took advantage of all the things that were offered to him, and in fact, he went to an electronics school in Great Lakes at the Naval Training Station there. That's where our youngest son was born. And I imagine the reason he got the job was because of his naval experience.
Well, if you were talking to an audience of young people, what would you want them to remember most about the World War II era?
Oh, I just hope it never happens again. Of course, it has happened since then, but I think there was an awful lot of patriotism, a lot of people who were willing to become a part of the World War II. A lot of people lost their lives. On the home front, a lot of people who were doing their job in various ways. We just remember that it was I guess it was a time when the country pulled together and tried to get through it the best we could. I know when Pearl Harbor happened, it was a horrible time. And I just hope we never have to go through anything like that again.
Were there songs you remember from that era?
Oh, yes. Now I can't think of any of them, but the White Cliffs of Dover. Well, I have a list of those. I wish I brought them. It was a big band era, you know, with Tommy Dorsey and Glenn Miller and all those big band leaders.
Did you like to dance?
Yeah.
Did you and your husband ever go out dancing?
Well, we did some, but he didn't like to dance too much.
I'd like to ask you if you ever heard mountain music around Boone.
Oh, indeed. I remember lots of songs that we used to sing when I was growing up. In fact, my cousin, Marshall Ward, who was a teacher at Banner Elk, North Carolina, he taught the 6th grade for like 30 years. He did not want to. They offered him a principalship, and he didn't want that. He wanted to teach, and he was known as a storyteller in the mountains of North Carolina. And he told the Jack Tales, which are 2 or 3 books. Some are here in the library, written by Richard Chase, and Marshall became quite well known for his storytelling of the Jack Tales. And a number of tapes are in, I think, the university at Boone and in the college over Johnson City, Eastern Tennessee State College. And he was written up in lots of publications and magazines, and he was quite well known as Marshall Ward the Storyteller.
And he was your first cousin?
My first cousin, yes. In fact, he lived with us when he went to Appalachian State Teachers College and got his degree to become a teacher. And he died several years ago. And there's quite a number of quite well-known storytellers up in the mountains. Ray Hicks, I think, is known all over the country for his storytelling.
Do you recall when they made the Blue Ridge Parkway? Was that a child
Yes,
then?
I do. I remember when they did that, and that was quite a thing to have that come through the mountains, and it took a number of years. And just, a few years ago, that one section called the Glen Cove Viaduct was completed, and I think that's one of the wonders of the world, one of the few places in the country, or in the world, that has this type of a viaduct that goes around the mountain, and it does not harm the environment. It's out from the mountain. It's on huge boulders, and if you've been up there, you know how beautiful it is, and what a marvel of engineering it is. In fact, I saw it just recently this summer when my kids came up to Boone when I was there. And I still have my old home place near Boone. It's out in the little Oak Grove community. My brother did live there until he had a stroke, and then after that, my husband and I decided to buy the old home place, and we did, and restored it. And I still have it, and still go up there in the summertime, and my family enjoys coming.
Do you remember favorite foods or things you wished you had to eat during those times? Do you remember the rationing? Do you remember what your favorite foods were?
Oh my goodness, yes. I grew up, well, we had a small farm at the time I was growing up. My mother always had a garden and fresh vegetables. She did a lot of canning, like beans, corn, cucumber pickles, all sorts of canned everything. Peaches. Of course, we would buy our peaches from somewhere else because we didn't grow peaches in the mountain too much. We used to go to the mountain, that's quite well known everywhere because of the profile of the grandfather face, and I have painted that a number of times too. We'd go up on Grandfather Mountain and pick what we called huckleberries. But now a lot of people in the mountains have blueberry farms. And this past summer I went to a friend's house and we picked blueberries growing just on these huge blueberry bushes. And of course we liked our cornbread and just all the things that you grow in the mountains. Now down here in Georgia, my husband's parents grew a lot of sweet potatoes, but sweet potatoes don't grow too well up in the mountains. But it is grows wonderful. Oh, apples! Apples, a good apple country up there. And apples and cherries and the types of fruits that can survive the cold weather. And by the way, it does get cold in the mountains in the wintertime. And Boone has become a ski resort. It's really it was always a summertime vacation spot because people love to come up because of the cool weather. But now it's year-round because they have the Beach Mountain Ski Resort, Sugar Mountain, several other smaller ski resorts. So it's a year-round resort place.
Can you,
excuse me,
if I threw out a name or two, can you tell me what you thought of, say, President Roosevelt?
Well, I thought he was a great man. He did an awful lot for our country, and he certainly did a lot for Georgia because he spent a lot of his time down in Springs because of his and he would go down to those springs, and in fact, the little White House, which is still now a historical place. And he did an awful lot for the people in that part of Georgia. And was, if you've been down there, you can see how he would go out in his car and ride around, talk with the farmers, and I think he did an awful lot for him. And I guess he was one of our great presidents.
Did you think much of President Truman? Would you like water?
I think so. I think I'm getting nervous.
All right.
You going to cut it off?
I can cut it off.
Okay. This is personal, but after he died, my husband died, we gave a bench on the Yorktown down at Patriots Point. Is that on?
Yes.
Yep. Is it now?
Yes.
Oh.
You're fine. You're fine.
Well, the USS Yorktown, which is at Patriots Point in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, the Yorktown is a part of a floating museum. And the Yorktown has become a museum for aircraft carriers. And back in 1990, the memorial compartment for the USS Franklin was dedicated. And after that, my family and I gave a bench, which is outside the compartment for the Franklin. We gave it in memory of Bill. And it's, oh, incidentally, next March 19th, 1995, aboard the Yorktown, the survivors of the USS Franklin and their families will have the 50th anniversary aboard the Yorktown. It's come full circle around. And of course, many of them are gone, but they're all very dedicated to, and very close. It's a very close-knit group of the Franklin survivors, or the 704 Club.
Can you recall President Truman for me?
I don't remember a whole lot about Truman. Not really.
That's all right.
When was that? I can't remember when.
1945 to 52, yeah.
President Truman's wife and his daughter. I guess I was so busy raising my family at that time and traveling around the Navy, I guess I wasn't too concerned. I figured he had everything going okay, taking care of the country.
Did you enjoy having the Naval Supply School here in Athens?
Oh, indeed. I still enjoy it. In fact, I do a lot of my shopping over at the Navy School, and really couldn't get along with it. I could get along with it, but I'd hate to. I'm real happy that the Navy Supply School is here in Athens, and it means a lot to all. And by the way, there's a lot of retired military people here, and quite an organization of retired. My husband belongs to the Retired Officers Association, which is Army, Navy, Marine Corps, all branches of service. And many of the military people who retire come here and work, either teach or in administration at the university. So and many of them were in school here at the Supply Corps School, and they liked it so well they came back to Athens.
What was the most difficult thing you had to deal with during those years?
Ooh, being away from my husband. It was a real bad time. In fact, at that time, I didn't realize it. I don't doubt if I could do it now, but with knowing that he was over in a very dangerous situation and that he might not come back, I guess that was the most difficult thing. And then so many times after when our boys began to grow up, he was away. He was on a ship away somewhere. And what we would do, we bought a house in Florida when he was on the Lake Champlain, and we lived there, and the boys went to school there. So he missed a lot of time with his children because of his Navy career. So I guess the most difficult thing was having him away from home.
Well, if you could sum up that experience, those days, in only 2 words, do you know what you would, in only a few words?
Oh, you mean the time during the war?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Sum up in only a few words. Well, it was just a very difficult time, and I thank God that my husband survived, that my brothers survived, and came back home and had a life after that. And that many people came back home. Many didn't, but it was for the.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with me today, Ms. Ellis.
You're welcome.
A certain gentleman you have a picture of is the curator who's organized these museums of your husband's career and the like on board the USS Franklin.
Yes, Dr. Steve Ewing. He's a senior curator at the Naval and Maritime Museum at Patriots Point, Mount Pleasant. It's a little town of Mount Pleasant. It's in the Charleston Harbor near Charleston, South Carolina. And I don't know where this will show up, but this is Dr. Ewing and one of Bill's shipmates.
It certainly does.
Sam Rhodes. And this picture was made beside the bench that my family and I gave, my sons and I, Steve and Jim, and I gave in memory of Bill. And it's outside the USS Franklin compartment, which contains memorabilia and all sorts of things that the different shipmates had, and they have contributed this to the compartment. And there are other museum compartments of other carriers, and there are numerous plaques all over the ship, and this is a plaque of the men who were killed when the Franklin was bombed. And this was made back in October 1987 when they dedication of the memorial plaques. And I think the Franklin has the largest number of people who were killed of any other carriers. There's plaques all over, well, and they have one section on the ship down on the hangar deck where they keep all these plaques.
And that's your husband's figure there.
That's my husband, my grandson.
That's a great photograph.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis.
Thank you.